I found out my parents secretly transferred the family business to my sister after I'd worked 90-hour weeks for no pay for years. When I confronted them, Dad slapped me in front of everyone because I was talking out of place. Mom egged him on, hit him again, he needs to learn respect. I didn't fight back. I didn't argue anymore. I just walked out and never returned to work. A week later, Mom called crying, "The business is failing without you. Julie doesn't know what she's doing and we're losing everything." No apology, no acknowledgement of what they'd done. I coldly replied, "Sounds like a Julie problem now." So here's the thing, I need to tell someone this story because it's been eating me alive, and my therapist says writing it out might help. Plus, maybe someone else out there has dealt with toxic family dynamics and needs to know they're not crazy. Because let me tell you, I thought I was losing my mind for a while there. Let me paint you a picture of my life up until recently. My name's Daniel, I'm 28, and for the past 6 years I've been working at my family's landscaping business, Walker & Sons Landscaping. Real original name, right? Dad started it back in '92, and it's been his baby ever since. Now, when I say working, I mean I was basically running the entire operation while my parents took credit and my sister Morgan. Well, she'd show up when she felt like it. And by show up, I mean she'd come in around 11 a.m., complain about the heat, take a 2-hour lunch break, and leave by 3 p.m. because she had other commitments. Meanwhile, I'm pulling 90-hour weeks during peak season, April through October here in Ohio, handling everything from client consultations to equipment maintenance to payroll. I'd be up at 5 a.m. loading trucks, out with the crews until 7 p.m., then back at the office until 11 p.m. doing estimates and paperwork. Weekends? What weekends? Saturday was catch-up day, Sunday was prep for Monday. The kicker? I wasn't getting paid. Well, not really. Dad would slip me a couple hundred here and there for gas money, but my official salary was a big fat zero. Family business, he'd say with that patronizing smile. We're all investing in our future together. I bought into it because, honestly, what choice did I have? This was supposed to be my inheritance, right? Walker & Sons, emphasis on sons. I'm the son. Morgan's. Well, she's Morgan. Don't get me wrong, I love my sister. But she's never shown any real interest in the business beyond using it as her personal ATM. She'd studied art history in college, Dad paid for all 4 years, naturally, then bounced between various creative pursuits while living rent-free in the family home. Meanwhile, I'd been working construction since I was 16, learned the business from the ground up, and had more dirt under my fingernails than she had completed projects. See, here's what I didn't fully understand until recently, I was dealing with classic golden child/scapegoat dynamics. Morgan was the princess who could do no wrong, and I was the workhorse who was expected to be grateful for the opportunity to sacrifice everything for the family. When Morgan would show up late, Mom would make excuses, she had a rough night, you know how sensitive she is. When I'd work through lunch because we had 3 crews running behind schedule, Dad would grumble about time management and how I needed to work smarter, not harder. The double standard was so blatant it would have been funny if it wasn't my life. Morgan could take random vacation days without notice, but when I asked for a weekend off to attend my college buddy's wedding, Dad acted like I was personally destroying the family legacy. This is a family business, Daniel. Family comes first. Your friend will understand. Spoiler alert, my friend did understand, but he also noticed I was becoming someone he barely recognized. Looking back, I can see how isolated I'd become. I'd stopped dating because I never had time. I'd lost touch with most of my friends because I was always working. My entire identity had become wrapped up in being the responsible son who was going to inherit this business and make everyone proud. What a joke. Things started getting weird around Christmas last year. There were hushed conversations between Mom and Dad that would stop abruptly when I walked into the room. Morgan started showing up to the office more often, not to work, but to have meetings with our parents. She'd bring her laptop and they'd disappear into Dad's office for hours. When I asked what was going on, Dad would wave me off with some generic response about planning for the future and you focus on the day-to-day operations. Looking back, I should have pushed harder, but I was so exhausted and overwhelmed that I was honestly grateful someone else was handling the big picture stuff. I remember one specific incident in February that should have been a massive red flag. We were bidding on a huge commercial contract, a new shopping center that wanted comprehensive landscaping. I'd spent weeks on the proposal, working with our suppliers to get the best pricing, creating detailed timelines, even driving out to scout similar projects we'd done for reference photos. The morning of the presentation, Dad tells me Morgan's going to be handling it. Just like that. No explanation, no good job on the prep work, nothing. When I asked why, he got defensive and said something about Morgan needing more experience with client relations and how this was a good opportunity for her to step up. I was livid, but I kept my mouth shut because that's what I always did. I was the good son, the reliable one, the one who didn't cause problems. Morgan went to the presentation wearing a business suit I'd never seen before, carrying my proposal in a leather portfolio that probably cost more than my monthly gas money. We got the contract. Dad was over the moon, praising Morgan for her natural business instincts and professional presentation. Mom was practically glowing with pride. And me? I got a pat on the back and a great job on the research, son. That night, I went home to my crappy studio apartment, because I couldn't afford anything better on no salary, and stared at the ceiling wondering if I was losing my mind. Was I being unreasonable? Was this normal family business stuff? Maybe I just needed to be more patient, more understanding. God, I was so naive. Fast forward to May. We're hitting our busy season, and I'm basically living at the office. I'd started coming in around 4 a.m. to get a head start on the day because our client list had grown so much, thanks in large part to that shopping center contract bringing in referrals. One morning, I'm in early as usual, grabbing some paperwork from Dad's office when I notice his computer is still logged in. Not unusual, Dad's not exactly tech savvy and rarely remembers to log out. But there's an email open on the screen, and I can't help but see it because it's right there in front of me. It's from our family lawyer, Mr. Bradley. The subject line reads, "Transfer of business ownership, final documents." My stomach drops. I know I shouldn't read it, no, it's probably none of my business, but something about the timing and all those secret meetings makes me click on it. What I read made my blood run cold. The email was confirming that the transfer of Walker & Sons landscaping from my parents to Morgan had been completed. Not to me and Morgan. Not to both of us. Just Morgan. The business I'd been killing myself for, the future I'd been promised, the inheritance I'd sacrificed 6 years of my life for, it was all hers now. I sat there staring at the screen, reading and rereading the lawyer's email, trying to process what I was seeing. There were references to previous conversations, mentions of Morgan's increased involvement and demonstrated leadership capabilities. There was even a line about how this transfer would ensure the business continues under capable management. The date on the transfer? April 15th. Over a month ago. They'd been lying to my face for over a month. I printed the email, I don't know why, instinct maybe, and just sat there holding it. My hands were shaking. I felt like I was going to throw up. That's when I started digging. Once you know what you're looking for, it's amazing what you can find. I spent the next hour going through files, both digital and physical. Dad's not the most organized guy, and apparently he'd been getting careless about hiding things. I found correspondence going back to January discussing the transfer. I found meeting notes in Morgan's handwriting about transitioning Daniel out gradually and minimizing disruption to operations. I found bank statements showing payments to the lawyer dating back 3 months. But here's the part that really hurt. I found a document titled Business Transition Plan that laid out exactly how they were going to handle me. It was clinical, calculating, and absolutely devastating. The plan was to keep me working at my current pace through the busy season, then gradually reduce my responsibilities while transitioning Morgan into leadership. By next spring, I'd be working as a regular employee under Morgan's management, with an appropriate salary, which, based on their budget projections, looked like it would be about $35,000 a year. $35,000. For running a business that was on track to gross over $800,000 this year. They'd been planning this for months. All those late nights I'd been working, all those weekends I'd sacrificed, all those times I'd pushed myself to exhaustion for our family business, they were just using me to build something that was never going to be mine. I sat there in Dad's office, surrounded by evidence of their betrayal, and tried to wrap my head around it. These were my parents. The people who'd raised me, who'd always preached about family loyalty and working together toward common goals. And they'd been lying to me for months. I could have handled this quietly. Could have scheduled a family meeting, presented my concerns in a calm and rational manner, maybe even negotiated some kind of compromise. But I was 28 years old, I'd been working like a dog for 6 years without real compensation, and I just discovered my family had been planning to screw me over for months. So yeah, I confronted them. Right there in the office, while Morgan was in one of her rare appearances and Mom was dropping off lunch for everyone. "So," I said, walking into the main office area with a printed email in my hand, "when exactly were you planning to tell me about this?" Dad looked up from his sandwich, saw the paper in my hand, and I watched his face go through about 5 different emotions in 2 seconds. Morgan got this deer in headlights look, and Mom just looked annoyed, like I'd interrupted something important. "Daniel," Dad started, but I cut him off. "No, seriously. I'm curious about the timeline here. Were you going to wait until after the busy season? Maybe Christmas? Or were you just going to keep letting me work myself into the ground until I figured it out on my own?" "Now hold on just a minute," Mom jumped in, using that tone she'd perfected when I was a kid. "You're being dramatic." "Dramatic?" I held up the email. "I found out from Mr. Bradley's email that you transferred the entire business to Morgan over a month ago. A business I've been running for 6 years. How exactly is that being dramatic?" Morgan finally found her voice. "Daniel, it's not like that. We were going to talk to you." "When?" I interrupted. "Because according to this transition plan, You were going to keep me working for another year before gradually reducing my role. No conversation. No discussion. Just slowly squeezing me out while I kept doing all the actual work. That's when Dad stood up, and I could see he was getting angry. You need to watch your tone, son. This is still my business, and I'll make decisions I think are best for the family. Your business? I laughed, but there was nothing funny about it. I've been running this place for years. I handle the clients, manage the crews, do the estimates, maintain the equipment, balance the books. What exactly do you do besides show up to collect checks? Wrong thing to say. I knew it the second the words left my mouth. Dad's face went dark red. After everything we've done for you, everything we've given you, this is how you talk to us? This is the respect we get? Respect? I was past caring about consequences now. You want to talk about respect? How about respecting me enough to include me in decisions about my own future? How about respecting the fact that I've sacrificed everything for this business? How about? That's when he hit me. I've been in fights before. Construction sites, high school, the occasional bar disagreement. But I'd never been slapped by my own father. Not since I was a little kid, and certainly not as a grown man. It wasn't even a hard hit, physically. But the humiliation, the shock, the complete disrespect of it, that hit harder than any punch ever could. The office went dead silent. Morgan gasped. Even Dad looked surprised at what he'd done. But then Mom opened her mouth. Good, she said. Hit him again. He needs to learn some respect. I just stared at her. This woman who'd given birth to me, who'd supposedly loved me, who I'd been killing myself to make proud, she was encouraging my father to hit me because I dared to question their betrayal. He's gotten too big for his britches, Mom continued, her voice getting stronger. All this work has gone to his head. He thinks he's entitled to something he's not. Dad was nodding along, getting his confidence back. Your mother's right. You're out of line, and you need to remember your place in this family. I looked around the room. At my father, red-faced and righteous. At my mother, arms crossed and satisfied. At my sister, who couldn't even look me in the eye. And something inside me just broke. Or maybe it was fixed. I don't know. But I felt this weird calm come over me. You know what? I said quietly. You're absolutely right. I do need to remember my place. I walked over to my desk, grabbed my personal stuff, which wasn't much, just a coffee mug and a picture of my college friends. I took my keys to the work trucks off my keychain and set them on Dad's desk. My place, I continued, still in that same calm voice, is anywhere but here. Now Daniel, Dad started, but I held up my hand. No, I get it now. This is Morgan's business. Morgan's responsibility. Morgan's problem. I looked directly at my sister. Hope you know what you're doing, sis. And then I walked out. Just like that. 6 years of my life, gone. No dramatic speech, no threats, no promises of revenge. I just left. I got in my beat-up Honda Civic and drove home, and for the first time in years, I felt like I could actually breathe. The first few days were honestly kind of surreal. I kept waking up at 5 a.m. out of habit, then remembering I had nowhere to go. No crews to coordinate, no equipment to check, no crisis to manage. It was weird, but also kind of amazing. I'd been living off my savings, what little I had, plus some money I'd managed to squirrel away over the years. It wasn't much, but it was enough to buy me some time to figure out my next move. I spent a lot of time just walking around my neighborhood, thinking. I'd been so focused on the business for so long that I'd forgotten what it felt like to just exist without constantly worrying about schedules and deadlines and whether the crews were going to show up on time. My phone was buzzing constantly. Missed calls from Morgan, from Dad, even a few from Mom. Text messages that started apologetic and gradually got more demanding. I didn't answer any of them. What was there to say? But here's the thing I started noticing, calls from clients. Lots of them. See, I'd been the face of Walker & Sons for years. I was the one who'd built relationships with our customers, who they trusted to handle their properties, who they called when they had problems or questions. And now I was just gone. Mrs. Whitman called because her sprinkler system was acting up and she couldn't reach anyone at the office. The property manager for Westfield Shopping Center wanted to discuss the fall cleanup schedule and was frustrated that Morgan didn't seem to know what he was talking about. 3 different clients called asking specifically for me, saying they'd been transferred to Morgan but she couldn't answer their questions about ongoing projects. I didn't call them back either. Not my problem anymore, right? It was exactly 1 week after I'd walked out when Mom called. Not Dad, not Morgan, Mom. And she wasn't calling to apologize. Daniel, she said when I finally answered, you need to come back to work. This is ridiculous. Hi, Mom. I'm doing well, thanks for asking. Don't be smart with me. The business is falling apart without you, and you know it. I almost laughed. Funny, because a week ago you were telling Dad to hit me for being too entitled. Now suddenly you need me? That was different. You were being disrespectful. And now? There was a pause. Now we need you to come back and fix things. Morgan is. She's struggling. She doesn't know how to handle some of the technical aspects. The technical aspects, I repeated. You mean running the business? She's learning. But these clients are being unreasonable, and some of the crew members are being difficult, and you thought Morgan could just step in and everything would magically work itself out? Another pause. We thought you'd help her transition. That you'd be supportive. By working for her? At $35,000 a year? Silence. She hadn't expected me to know about that part. Daniel, this is your family. We're asking you to come back and help us through this difficult time. Are you apologizing? What? Are you apologizing? For lying to me for months? For transferring the business behind my back? For encouraging Dad to hit me? Are you acknowledging that what you did was wrong? More silence. Because if you're not apologizing, if you're just calling because you need me to clean up the mess you've made, then I think we're done here. Daniel, you're being stubborn. This is bigger than your hurt feelings. We're losing money. Real money. We might have to lay people off. And there it was. The manipulation, the guilt-tripping, the complete inability to take responsibility for their actions. Even now, with their backs against the wall, they couldn't admit they'd messed up. You know what, Mom? You're right. This is bigger than my hurt feelings. This is about respect, and trust, and basic human decency. And since you can't seem to manage any of those things, I think Morgan's going to have to figure this out on her own. What does that mean? It means, I said, feeling that same strange calm from a week ago, that sounds like a Morgan problem now. I hung up. After that phone call, I did something I probably should have done years ago. I reached out to some of our former clients and a few key crew members, just to check in. Not to badmouth my family or steal business, just to see what was happening. What I found out was both satisfying and kind of sad. Our biggest client, Westfield Shopping Center, had terminated their contract after Morgan missed 2 scheduled maintenance visits and couldn't explain the billing discrepancies they'd found. That was a $120,000 annual contract. 3 of our best crew leaders had quit in the past week. 2 of them told me they'd been asked to work overtime without pay to help the family through a rough patch, and when they refused, Morgan had gotten snippy with them. The third guy, Tony, who'd been with us for 4 years, said Morgan had tried to change the crew scheduling without understanding how the logistics worked, creating a mess that left 3 different job sites without coverage on the same day. Mrs. Whitman, our sweet elderly client who'd been with us since Dad started the business, had called a different company after flooding her basement because Morgan had installed a sprinkler head backwards and water had been shooting directly at her foundation for 3 days. It was a disaster. A completely predictable disaster. The worst part? I'd tried to set up systems to prevent exactly this kind of thing. I'd created client files with detailed notes, maintenance schedules, crew assignments, equipment logs, everything someone would need to keep things running smoothly. But none of that matters if the person in charge doesn't understand the business well enough to use the systems effectively. Morgan had been handed a well-oiled machine and managed to break it in a week. 2 weeks after Mom's first call, Dad called. He sounded tired, older somehow. "Son," he said, "we need to talk." "Do we?" "This isn't working. Morgan's. She's trying her best, but she's in over her head. Some of these clients are talking about canceling their contracts. That's unfortunate. Daniel, I know we handled things poorly. Maybe we should have talked to you first, explained our reasoning." "Your reasoning?" I interrupted. "What reasoning could possibly justify lying to me for months while I worked myself to death for a business you'd already decided to give to someone else? We thought Morgan needed the opportunity to prove herself. And we thought you'd understand, given time." "Understand what? That I was just free labor? That's not how we saw it." "How did you see it, Dad? Help me understand. Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you used me to build up the business, then handed it over to Morgan the second it became profitable enough to be worth owning." Long pause. "We thought it would be better for Morgan to have the security. You're young, capable, you could start your own business if you wanted. Morgan. She's more fragile. She needs the stability." And there it was. The truth, finally. It wasn't about capability or merit or who'd earned it. It was about who they thought needed to be taken care of. Morgan was the princess who needed protection, and I was the workhorse who was supposed to be grateful for the opportunity to provide it. "So you never intended for me to inherit the business?" We hoped you'd want to work with Morgan. Be her partner." "Her partner? Dad, I've been running this business for years. I know every client, every crew member, every supplier. I've built relationships that took years to develop. And you wanted me to work under Morgan, who until 2 weeks ago couldn't tell you the difference between a sprinkler head and a drain pipe. She's learning. She's learning on a $250,000 client base that I spent 6 years building. I took a deep breath. Dad, let me ask you something. If you were in my position, if your parents had done to you what you did to me, what would you have done? Another long pause. I don't know. I do. You would have been furious. You would have felt betrayed and used and completely disrespected. The difference is, you probably would have burned the whole thing down on your way out. I just walked away. So what do you want from us? Nothing. I don't want anything from you. I wanted my family to treat me with basic respect and honesty, but that ship has sailed. Daniel, please. We're losing everything. If you don't come back, then you'll lose everything. And maybe that's what should happen. Maybe Morgan will learn something from having to actually face the consequences of her actions for once in her life. I hung up before he could respond. The last call came 3 weeks later. It was Mom again, but this time she was crying. Daniel, please. I'm begging you. We're going to lose the house. Morgan can't handle this, and we're bleeding money. We've lost 6 major clients this month. Tony and Luis both quit, and now we can't fulfill our contracts. The bank is asking questions about our business loan. Please, just come back for a few weeks, help us stabilize things. Part of me, a bigger part than I want to admit, felt sorry for her. These were my parents, after all. I'd grown up in that house she was talking about losing. I'd learned to drive in the driveway, had birthday parties in the backyard, brought dates to meet them at the kitchen table. But then I remembered the look on her face when she'd told Dad to hit me again. The satisfaction in her voice when she'd said I needed to learn my place. Mom, I said gently, do you think what you did to me was wrong? What do you mean? Do you think lying to me for months, transferring the business behind my back, and then encouraging Dad to hit me when I confronted you about it was wrong? We were trying to do what was best for the family. That's not what I asked. Do you think what you did to me specifically was wrong? Long pause. You're our son. We love you. We've always wanted what's best for you. Mom, it's a simple question. Do you think what you did was wrong? I think maybe we could have handled it better. That's not the same thing. Daniel, this isn't the time for. It's exactly the time. Because if you can't acknowledge that what you did was wrong, then nothing has changed. You're not calling because you realize you treated me horribly. You're calling because you need something from me. Again. We're family. Family doesn't lie to each other for months. Family doesn't encourage violence when someone asks reasonable questions. Family doesn't use one child as free labor to benefit another child. Please, Daniel. I'll do anything. Just tell me what you want. What did I want? I wanted my family back. I wanted parents who respected me and treated me fairly. I wanted a sister who'd earned her position instead of having it handed to her. I wanted 6 years of my life back. But I couldn't have any of that. I want you to figure this out yourselves, I said finally. Morgan owns the business now. Let her run it. Let her learn from her mistakes. Let her prove she deserves what you gave her. She can't do it alone. Then maybe she shouldn't own a business. I hung up and turned off my phone. That was 2 months ago. I've heard through mutual friends that Walker & Sons is still limping along, but barely. They've lost most of their major contracts and are down to basic lawn maintenance for residential clients. Morgan's apparently working 60-hour weeks trying to keep things afloat, which is probably the most she's ever worked in her life. Dad's had to come out of semi-retirement to help with the day-to-day operations. Mom's working the phones, trying to convince former clients to give them another chance. It's not going well. Meanwhile, I've been figuring out my own path forward. I reached out to some of the crew members who'd quit Walker & Sons, and 3 of them were interested in starting something new. Tony had been wanting to branch out on his own for years but never had the capital or connections. Luis had great ideas about expanding into hardscaping and outdoor lighting. We started Walker Green Solutions 2 weeks ago. Different name, different approach, but built on the relationships and expertise I'd developed over the past 6 years. We're starting small, but we've already landed 4 clients, 3 of them former Walker & Sons customers who specifically sought me out. I'm not trying to destroy my family's business. I'm just trying to build something of my own, something based on honesty and mutual respect instead of manipulation and false promises. Mrs. Whitman was our first client. She called me directly after hearing through the neighborhood grapevine that I'd started my own company. Daniel, she said, I don't care what your last name is. I trust you, and I want you taking care of my property. That meant more to me than any family approval ever could. Looking back, I think the hardest part of this whole experience wasn't the betrayal itself, it was realizing how long I'd been enabling it. I'd spent years making excuses for my family's behavior, convincing myself that their obvious favoritism toward Morgan was just temporary, that if I just worked harder and proved myself more completely, they'd eventually recognize my value. I'd been so focused on earning their approval that I'd lost sight of my own worth. I'd accepted being treated as less than because I thought it was the price I had to pay for belonging to the family. The truth is, they were never going to see me as an equal. In their minds, I was the responsible one who didn't need special treatment, and Morgan was the delicate one who needed protection and support. It didn't matter how hard I worked or how much I sacrificed, I was always going to be the one expected to make sacrifices for Morgan's benefit. The business transfer wasn't a betrayal of their promises to me. It was the logical conclusion of a dynamic that had been in place for years. I'd just been too close to see it clearly. This experience taught me a lot about boundaries, self-respect, and the difference between loyalty and enabling. I'd always thought that being a good son meant putting family first, no matter what. But there's a difference between supporting your family and allowing them to exploit you. Real love doesn't ask you to diminish yourself for someone else's benefit. Real respect doesn't require you to accept disrespect in return. Real family doesn't operate on the assumption that one person's needs are inherently more important than another's. I also learned that walking away from toxicity isn't giving up or being weak, it's choosing to value yourself enough to demand better treatment. Sometimes the only way to stop enabling bad behavior is to remove yourself from the situation entirely. My parents are probably never going to understand why I left or acknowledge that their treatment of me was wrong. They're too invested in their narrative of Morgan as the victim who needs protection and me as the strong one who should be grateful for any attention I get. That's okay. I don't need their understanding or acknowledgement anymore. I know what happened, I know what I'm worth, and I'm building something better. Morgan called me last week. First time I'd heard from her directly since everything went down. She sounded exhausted and frustrated, which honestly didn't surprise me. "Daniel," she said, "I think I messed up." "How so?" "This is harder than I thought it would be. The clients are demanding, the crew members don't respect me, and I have no idea how you kept track of everything. I'm working all the time and we're still falling behind. That's rough. I was thinking, maybe we could work together? You could come back as a partner, and we could run the business together. 50-50 split on everything." I actually laughed. "Morgan, you own 100% of a business I spent 6 years building. Now you're offering me 50% to come back and fix the mess you've made?" "I know it sounds bad when you put it like that. It sounds exactly like what it is. You want me to solve your problems without taking responsibility for creating them." "That's not. Daniel, I didn't know they were going to transfer everything to me. I thought we'd be working together." "Did you?" "Because I found the transition plan you wrote, the one where you talked about gradually reducing Daniel's role. That doesn't sound like working together." Long pause. "I was scared. Mom and Dad kept saying you were so much better at everything, and I felt like I had to prove I could do it on my own." "By pushing me out?" "By showing them I could handle responsibility. But I can't. At least, not alone. I need help." For the first time since this all started, Morgan sounded genuinely humble and honest. It was a side of her I hadn't seen in years. "Morgan, what exactly are you asking me to do?" "Come back. Help me save the business. We can be real partners this time." "And what about Mom and Dad?" They're not happy about me calling you. They think you should come back and help because it's the right thing to do, not because we need to negotiate with you." There it was. Even now, even with their business falling apart, they couldn't acknowledge that they owed me anything. They expected me to come running back because family obligation demanded it. "Morgan, can I ask you something?" "Sure." "Do you think what they did to me was wrong?" She was quiet for a long time. "Yes," she finally said. "It was wrong. I knew it was wrong when it was happening, but I was too selfish to say anything. I wanted the business, and I convinced myself I deserved it because I was family too." It was the first real apology I'd gotten from anyone. "I'm sorry, Daniel. I'm sorry for going along with it, and I'm sorry for not standing up for you, and I'm sorry for letting you work yourself to death while I coasted." "I appreciate that," I said, and I meant it. "But I'm not coming back." "Why not?" I said I was sorry. "Because sorry doesn't fix 6 years of being treated like free labor. Sorry doesn't undo the fact that you let me carry the entire business while you figured out what you wanted to do with your life. And sorry doesn't change the fact that you only called me because you need something from me." "That's not. Morgan, when was the last time you called me just to see how I was doing? When was the last time you showed any interest in my life that wasn't related to the business?" Silence. "I'm not angry anymore," I continued. "I was, for a while, but now I'm just done. I'm building something new, something that's mine, and I'm happy. I don't want to go back to being taken for granted." "So that's it? You're just going to let the business fail?" "I'm not letting anything happen. You're running the business now. What happens to it is up to you." "But it's the family business. Dad built it, and now it's yours. Figure it out." I hung up feeling sad but not conflicted. Morgan's apology was genuine, and I appreciated it. But apologizing for enabling something doesn't undo the damage, and needing help doesn't entitle you to forgiveness. Here's something I didn't expect. Other people started reaching out to me with their own family business horror stories. Apparently, my situation isn't as unique as I thought. My buddy Connor, who I hadn't talked to in years because I'd been too busy working, called after hearing about what happened. Turns out his family went through something similar with their restaurant. His parents promised the business to him and his brother equally, then surprised them by selling it to a chain and retiring to Florida with the proceeds. The hardest part, Connor told me, wasn't losing the restaurant. It was realizing my parents saw me as an employee, not a partner. They made all the major decisions without consulting us, then expected us to be grateful for whatever scraps they threw our way. I've heard variations of this story at least a dozen times now. Adult children who worked for family businesses for years, sacrificing their own opportunities, only to discover they were never really considered part of the ownership equation. It's depressingly common. It makes me wonder how many people are out there right now, working themselves to death for family businesses that will never actually belong to them, thinking that if they just work a little harder or prove themselves a little more, they'll finally get the recognition they deserve. My therapist, Dr. Emily Brooks, has been helping me work through a lot of this stuff. One thing she pointed out that really stuck with me was how I'd been operating from a scarcity mindset for years. You were so afraid of losing your place in the family, she said, that you accepted being treated poorly rather than risk standing up for yourself. You thought your only value was in how useful you could be to them. She was right. I'd convinced myself that my worth was tied to my productivity, that love had to be earned through sacrifice and service. The idea that I deserved respect and fair treatment just for being a person, not because of what I could do for others, was foreign to me. We've been working on recognizing the difference between healthy family loyalty and codependent enabling. Healthy loyalty means supporting each other through difficult times while maintaining appropriate boundaries. Codependent enabling means sacrificing your own well-being to protect others from the consequences of their actions. For years, I've been enabling my family's dysfunction by accepting unequal treatment and making excuses for their behavior. I told myself I was being the bigger person or keeping the peace, but really I was just avoiding conflict at my own expense. Dr. Brooks also helped me understand that walking away wasn't abandonment, it was self-preservation. You can't save people who don't want to be saved, she said. And you can't change people who don't think they need to change. One unexpected consequence of all this has been reconnecting with old friends and making new ones. When you're working 90-hour weeks, you don't have much time for relationships outside of work. Now that I have evenings and weekends again, I've been rediscovering what it's like to have a social life. I started dating again, which feels weird after years of telling people I was too busy for relationships. Met a woman named Rachel at a coffee shop near my apartment. She's a teacher, completely unconnected to the landscaping world, and she has no idea what to make of my family situation. So let me get this straight, she said over dinner last week, you worked for free for 6 years building up a business, and then your parents gave it to your sister without telling you? That's the basic story, yeah. And when you confronted them about it, your dad hit you. Slapped me, but yeah. And your mom encouraged it? Encouraged him to do it again, actually. She just stared at me for a minute. Daniel, that's not normal family conflict. That's abuse. It was the first time anyone had used that word to describe what happened, and it hit me like a truck. I'd been so focused on the business betrayal that I hadn't really processed the physical and emotional aspects of that confrontation. I mean, I know it was wrong. I started. It wasn't just wrong, it was abusive. They used your labor for years, lied to you about your future, and then physically and verbally attacked you when you questioned their actions. That's textbook exploitation and abuse. Hearing it from someone with no emotional investment in the situation was eye-opening. I'd been minimizing what happened because they were family, because the slap wasn't that hard, because I didn't want to think of my parents as abusive people. But Rachel was right. The pattern of behavior, the exploitation, the gaslighting, the physical aggression when I stood up for myself, was abusive. Recognizing that has been both liberating and heartbreaking. Running my own business has taught me things I never learned working for my family. When every decision ultimately came from Dad, I never had to think about long-term strategy or financial planning beyond the immediate operational needs. Now I'm learning about business insurance, liability protection, employee rights, marketing strategies, and all the other aspects of business ownership that my parents never let me handle. It's challenging but also exciting in a way that working for Walker & Sons never was. Tony, Luis, Mark and I meet every Friday morning to discuss the week's progress and plan for the future. Everyone has an equal voice in decision-making, everyone shares in the profits proportionally, and everyone knows exactly where the business stands financially. It's the partnership I thought I was working toward for 6 years, just with different people. We're also doing things differently from how Walker & Sons operated. We pay our crew members above market rate and offer health insurance benefits. We invest in high-quality equipment instead of constantly patching up old machinery. We turn down clients who want to cut corners or treat workers poorly. Happy employees do better work, Tony pointed out during one of our meetings. When people feel valued and fairly compensated, they care about the results. It seems obvious now, but it was revolutionary compared to Dad's approach of squeezing every penny and expecting people to be grateful for whatever they got. About a month ago, I met with a lawyer to discuss whether I had any legal recourse against my family. I wasn't necessarily planning to sue them, but I wanted to understand my options. The lawyer, Ms. Lawson, reviewed the documentation I'd saved and asked detailed questions about my work arrangement over the past 6 years. "This is an interesting case," she said finally. "You were essentially an unpaid employee performing executive-level duties for a for-profit business. Even family businesses have to follow labor laws." She explained that I could potentially file claims for unpaid wages, overtime violations, and possibly even fraud, given that they'd made promises about my future ownership while knowing they planned to transfer the business to someone else. "The challenge," she continued, "is that family business arrangements often operate in legal gray areas, especially when there are no formal employment contracts. And pursuing legal action against family members can be emotionally and financially costly." I asked about the likelihood of success and potential recovery. "Based on the documentation you've shown me and your description of your role, I think you'd have a strong case for unpaid wages. 6 years of 90-hour weeks at prevailing management wages would be substantial. But litigation could take years and would definitely destroy any remaining family relationships." I thanked her for the consultation but decided not to pursue legal action. Not because I was afraid of hurting my family's feelings, that ship had sailed, but because I was more interested in building my future than litigating my past. Though I have to admit, there's a certain satisfaction in knowing I could probably bankrupt them through legitimate legal channels if I wanted to. I don't want to, but knowing I could gives me a sense of power I never had before. 2 weeks ago, something happened that I honestly didn't see coming. Dad showed up at my apartment. I was getting ready for work when I heard a knock at the door. When I looked through the peephole and saw him standing there, my first instinct was not to answer. We hadn't spoken since that phone call over a month ago, and I wasn't eager to rehash the same arguments. But curiosity got the better of me. "Dad," I said, opening the door but not inviting him in. "Son." He looked older than I remembered, more tired. "Can we talk?" "Depends on what you want to talk about." "I owe you an apology." That wasn't what I'd expected. I studied his face, looking for signs that this was another manipulation, another attempt to guilt me into coming back. But he just looked defeated. "Okay," I said finally. "Come in." We sat at my small kitchen table, and for a minute neither of us said anything. Finally, Dad cleared his throat. "I've been thinking a lot about what happened," he began. "About the things we said, the way we treated you. And I realized something." He paused, seeming to gather his thoughts. "I realized that somewhere along the way, I stopped seeing you as my son and started seeing you as just a resource. Someone who would always be there to handle things, who would always put the family first no matter what we asked of you." I stayed quiet, not sure where this was going. "When Morgan came to us and said she wanted more involvement in the business, your mother and I thought it would be good for her. Give her some direction, some responsibility. But instead of including you in those conversations, instead of figuring out how to bring her in as a partner alongside you, we took the easy path." "The easy path?" "We assumed you'd go along with whatever we decided because you always had before. We assumed your loyalty was unconditional because you'd never given us reason to think otherwise." He looked down at his hands. "That slap. Daniel, I've never been so ashamed of anything in my life. The second I did it, I knew I'd crossed a line I could never uncross. And when your mother egged me on." He shook his head. "We were both wrong. Completely, inexcusably wrong." I waited for the but. "There's always a but with these apologies. There's no excuse for how we treated you," he continued. "No justification for lying to you, or using you, or hitting you. I failed as a father, and I failed as a man. And I'm sorry." Still no but. I was genuinely surprised. "What do you want from me, Dad?" "Nothing," he said, and I believed him. "I don't expect you to forgive me. I don't expect you to come back to the business. I just needed you to know that I understand what we did was wrong, and I'm sorry for it." We sat in silence for a while. Finally, I asked, "What about Mom?" "Morgan? Your mother is. She's having a harder time accepting that we made mistakes. She still thinks you're being stubborn and that you should put family first." "And Morgan?" "Morgan's drowning. She works 16-hour days trying to keep up with everything, and she's constantly stressed and overwhelmed. But she's too proud to admit she's in over her head." "How's the business?" "Honestly? It's failing. We're going to lose most of our remaining contracts by the end of the season if things don't turn around. But that's not your problem anymore." He stood up to leave, then paused at the door. "For what it's worth, I'm proud of what you're building with your new company. Mrs. Whitman called to tell us how happy she is with your work. She said you were always the one she trusted anyway." After he left, I sat at my kitchen table for a long time, processing what had just happened. It was the apology I'd been wanting for months, but now that I had it, I wasn't sure what to do with it. I called Dr. Brooks and told her about the visit. "How do you feel about his apology?" she asked. "I don't know. Part of me is glad he finally acknowledged what they did wrong. But part of me is angry that it took the business failing for him to realize it. That's a normal reaction. Apologies that come only after consequences have been felt can feel less genuine, even when they're sincere. Do you think it was sincere? What do you think? I thought about it. Yeah, I think it was. He looked broken. Like he finally understood what he'd lost. And how does that make you feel? Sad. Relieved. Still angry, but less angry than before. Are you considering reconciling with them? No, I said without hesitation. I appreciate the apology, but it doesn't change the fundamental dynamic. They still think of Morgan as someone who needs protection and me as someone who should provide it. Dad apologized for how they handled the situation, but he didn't say anything about the underlying favoritism that created the situation in the first place. Dr. Brooks was quiet for a moment. What would need to change for you to consider rebuilding a relationship with them? I don't know if anything could change enough. The trust is broken, and I'm not sure it can be repaired. Plus, I'm happy with my life now. I don't need their validation or approval anymore. Here's the thing that's been surprising me, I'm actually happier now than I've been in years. Maybe ever. Walker Green Solutions is thriving. We're booked solid through the end of the season, and we're already getting calls about next year's contracts. More importantly, I love going to work again. I love the collaborative decision-making, the shared responsibility, the feeling that everyone's contributions are valued. Tony brought in his nephew last month, a kid fresh out of high school who's eager to learn the business. Instead of throwing him on a crew and hoping for the best, we created a formal apprenticeship program where he rotates through different aspects of the operation, learning everything from equipment maintenance to client relations. This is how you build a business that lasts, Luis pointed out. You invest in people, treat them fairly, and teach them to take pride in their work. We're also branching out into services that Walker & Sons never offered. Mark had the idea to add holiday lighting installation, which has turned into a surprisingly lucrative winter revenue stream. Luis's hardscaping projects are getting attention from high-end residential clients who want custom outdoor living spaces. I handle most of the client relations and project management, which plays to my strengths and experience. But unlike at Walker & Sons, where I was handling everything out of necessity, here I'm doing it because it's what I'm good at and what I enjoy. We're even talking about bringing on a fourth partner next year, someone with expertise in irrigation systems and water management. The goal isn't to get as big as possible as fast as possible, but to grow sustainably while maintaining our quality standards and company culture. Looking back on everything that's happened, I keep thinking about a conversation I had with my college roommate, Ryan, about a month after I left Walker & Sons. Ryan's a financial advisor now, and he was helping me figure out my business plan for the new company. You know what's crazy? He said while we were going over projected earnings. Based on what you're telling me about your role at your family's business, you should have been making at least $80,000 a year, probably more. Over 6 years, they essentially stole hundreds of thousands of dollars from you in unpaid wages. I'd never thought about it in those terms before. I'd focused on the betrayal and disrespect, but Ryan was right, there was a massive financial component to what they'd done to me. Even if you'd been paid fairly, though, Ryan continued, you still would have been working for someone else, building someone else's wealth. Now you're building your own. That really resonated with me. Even in the best case scenario where my parents had been honest and fair, I still would have been an employee in someone else's business. Now I'm an owner in my own business, with partners I trust and respect. The betrayal, as painful as it was, forced me into a situation that's ultimately much better for me long term. If they'd just given me a fair stake in Walker & Sons from the beginning, I probably would have stayed there forever, never realizing I was capable of building something better on my own. It's been 4 months now since I walked out of Walker & Sons. Here's where things stand. My parents' business is hanging on by a thread. They've managed to avoid bankruptcy so far, but they're operating at a fraction of their former capacity. Morgan's apparently gotten better at the day-to-day operations through sheer necessity, but they've lost most of their institutional knowledge and client relationships. Mom still calls occasionally, usually when they're facing some crisis that I used to handle. The calls have gotten less frequent and less demanding over time. I think she's finally starting to accept that I'm not coming back to save them. Dad and I have had 2 more conversations since his apology visit. They were brief and cordial, but there's an awkwardness there that I don't think will ever fully go away. He asks about my business, I ask about his health, we avoid talking about anything substantial. Morgan and I haven't spoken since that phone call where she offered me a 50-50 partnership. I heard through mutual friends that she's seeing a therapist now, which is probably good for her. Maybe she'll figure out how to run the business, maybe she won't. Either way, it's not my problem anymore. Walker Green Solutions is exceeding all our projections. We're already discussing expansion plans for next year, including potentially opening a second location or adding specialty services like landscape design. More importantly, I'm rediscovering who I'm outside of my family dynamic. I'm dating Rachel seriously now, we're talking about moving in together next year. I've reconnected with old friends and made new ones. I have hobbies again, interests that aren't related to work. If I had to summarize what I've learned from this whole experience, it would be this. Your family's dysfunction is not your responsibility to fix. For years, I thought it was my job to hold everything together, to be the reliable one who kept the business running and the family happy. But you can't save people who don't want to be saved, and you can't change people who don't think they need to change. Know your worth, and don't accept less than you deserve. I spent 6 years accepting unfair treatment because I thought that's what family loyalty looked like. But real love and respect don't require you to diminish yourself for someone else's benefit. Walking away isn't giving up, it's choosing yourself. The hardest part of leaving wasn't losing the business or the money, it was accepting that my family cared more about their own comfort than my well-being. But once I stopped trying to earn their approval and started focusing on building my own life, everything got better. Consequences are often the only teacher that works. My family didn't understand the value of my contributions until they had to manage without them. Sometimes people need to experience the full weight of their choices before they're motivated to change. Success is the best revenge, but it's not really about revenge. Building Walker Green Solutions wasn't about showing my family what they'd lost, it was about proving to myself what I was capable of. The fact that it also demonstrated their poor judgment was just a bonus. Here's something I never expected: leaving my family's business was the best thing that ever happened to me professionally and personally. At Walker & Sons, I was the guy who handled everything but had no real authority. I was indispensable but not valued, overworked but underpaid, respected by clients but taken for granted by ownership. I thought that was just how family businesses worked. Now I'm a co-owner of a company where my opinions matter, where decisions are made collaboratively, where success is shared equitably. I work hard because I want to, not because I have to prove myself to people who will never appreciate my efforts. I also have a life outside of work for the first time in years. Rachel and I went to a concert last weekend, just because we wanted to, not because we were celebrating some business milestone or attending a networking event. We're planning a vacation to Colorado next month, something I never could have done when I was working 90-hour weeks. Last week, Tony mentioned that his daughter's school was looking for volunteers to help with their garden project. 5 years ago, I would have said I was too busy. This time, I signed up without hesitation. It's been incredibly rewarding to teach kids about plants and soil and growing things, with no ulterior motive beyond sharing knowledge and having fun. These are the kinds of experiences I missed out on when my entire identity was wrapped up in being the indispensable son who sacrificed everything for the family business. I started this story by talking about that moment when your whole world shifts, when everything you thought you knew turns out to be different than you believed. For me, that moment was finding that email about the business transfer. But here's what I've realized: that moment wasn't when my world fell apart. It was when my real world began. For 6 years, I'd been living in a fantasy where hard work and loyalty would eventually be rewarded, where family meant mutual respect and fair treatment, where sacrifice would lead to recognition and appreciation. The email didn't destroy that world, it revealed that the world had never existed in the first place. My real world is messier but more honest. It's a world where I have to take responsibility for my own success instead of waiting for someone else to recognize my value. It's a world where relationships have to be earned and maintained through mutual respect rather than family obligation. It's a world where I get to decide what I'm worth and insist on being treated accordingly. My parents and Morgan are still struggling with Walker & Sons, still dealing with the consequences of their choices. Part of me feels bad about that, but it's not my responsibility to fix their problems anymore. They made their decisions, and now they get to live with the results. I made my decision too. I chose to walk away from toxicity and build something better. I chose to value myself enough to demand fair treatment. I chose to stop enabling dysfunction and start creating health. Some people might say I should have tried harder to work things out with my family, that I should have been more forgiving or understanding. But you know what? I gave them 6 years of my life, worked myself to exhaustion building their business, and got slapped in the face for asking basic questions about my future. I don't owe them any more chances. What I owe myself is a life where I'm valued and respected, where my contributions are acknowledged and fairly compensated, where I'm treated as an equal partner rather than free labor. I found that life, just not where I expected to find it. And honestly, I wouldn't change anything. The betrayal hurt, the family conflict was painful, and starting over was scary. But it led me to discover what I'm really capable of when I'm not being held back by other people's limitations and dysfunction. So to anyone out there who's dealing with similar family dynamics, who's sacrificing their own well-being for people who take them for granted, who's waiting for recognition that may never come, you have more options than you think. You have more value than they're acknowledging. And you deserve better than you're accepting. Sometimes the best thing you can do for everyone involved is to stop enabling the dysfunction and start demanding better treatment. It's scary, and it's hard, and it might cost you relationships you thought were important. But it might also save your life. Trust me on this one. It saved mine.